It was raining again that morning in Portland, the kind of rain that doesn't fall, but lingers, soft, gray, almost polite. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt. Too quiet, maybe. At 68, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just a mirror you're afraid to look into. I was pouring my first cup of coffee when I saw it. A pale envelope sitting on the porch table, edges damp from the mist. No return address. Only my name written in that small, tidy handwriting I used to tease him about. Samuel's handwriting. I froze. My husband had been gone for 5 years. His ashes rested in a small urn above the fireplace, the same place I talked to every night before bed. But this was his hand, his slant, his pressure on paper. I told myself it was impossible. Maybe an old colleague cleaning out a file. Maybe one of those alumni mailers from St. Mary's Hospital. But then I turned it over and saw the seal. St. Mary's. For a second, I swear the world leaned sideways. I took a breath, sat down, and slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a folded sheet, yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of antiseptic and rain. The heading said, Commemoration Ceremony, 30 years since the fire at Wing C. I felt my stomach twist. That fire, 30 years ago, the one that shut down half the hospital. Samuel had worked that night. He'd come home covered in ash, shaking, said only one thing. Some things don't belong in reports. We never talked about it again. Beneath the invitation was a small note, written in ink that bled slightly through the paper. 4 short words, signed with his initial. If you're reading this, Laura, the truth didn't die with me. S. I just sat there, staring at those words. The rain ticked on the roof, steady and indifferent. My heart wasn't racing. It was remembering. The truth didn't die with me. It sounded like a message, a confession, maybe a warning. For a moment, I thought about calling my son, Peter. But what would I say? Hey, honey, your dead father just sent me a letter. He'd think I'd finally lost it. So I did what any retired doctor would do. I looked for logic. The human brain always wants an explanation before it lets you feel. But the truth is, logic doesn't stand a chance against grief. I poured another coffee, sat by the window, and looked out at the street. Same view I'd seen for decades. Wet asphalt, neighbors walking dogs, the faint hum of life that never seems to notice you've stopped moving. I kept reading the invitation. Commemoration ceremony, a polite phrase for what had been a tragedy. 3 nurses and 1 patient had died that night, if I remember correctly. Or at least that's what the paper said. But why would Samuel tie that fire to me? There was something almost cruel about the timing. Tomorrow would have been our 45th wedding anniversary. Maybe this was a prank, I told myself, or an administrative mix-up. But deep down, I felt it. That small, magnetic pull of unfinished business. Samuel had always been the calm one, the rational one. When he died, I thought his silence was finally over. But now, it felt like he'd just switched rooms. I turned the note over, hoping for more. There was nothing. Only a faint imprint where the pen had pressed harder, as if he'd hesitated before writing. I whispered into the empty kitchen. What truth, Sam? The kettle clicked as it cooled. The rain kept falling. Sometimes I think the universe knows when we're ready to break our own peace. I hadn't been back to St. Mary's since the funeral. After the fire, they rebuilt, then closed half of it for structural reasons. The basement archives, the old surgical ward, all sealed. Samuel never spoke about that night again. When I asked, he'd smile that tired smile and say, "Some stories can only end in silence." I used to believe him. But as I held that letter, I realized maybe silence wasn't the ending. Maybe it was the waiting room. I folded the papers carefully and slid them into my coat pocket. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the rain, the ticking clock, my own breathing. The house suddenly felt like it was holding its breath with me. When people get older, they say, we fear death. But that's not quite true. What we really fear is living long enough to face the questions we've avoided. And right then, I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore that note. By noon, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I pulled on my gray coat, the one Samuel used to hate because it made me look like a detective, and stepped outside. The air smelled like pine and wet concrete. The city felt smaller than I remembered. At the corner, the mail carrier waved. "Morning, Dr. Finch. You got something interesting today?" I smiled politely, more than I expected. Every step toward my car felt heavier. As if the closer I got to the hospital, the more I'd have to admit what I already knew. Samuel's story wasn't finished. Driving through the city, old memories came in fragments. Samuel's laughter in the kitchen, the sound of his shoes on the hospital floor, the way he'd hum Sinatra while writing patient notes. All of it so ordinary, so safe. And yet, here I was, chasing a ghost through the rain. I parked outside St. Mary's. The building stood gray and hollow, its windows boarded up on one side, like a scar the city forgot to heal. Through the windshield, I could still see the faint outline of Wing C, the part that burned. For a moment, I almost turned back. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. But curiosity is a kind of courage, isn't it? It's what keeps us human. I stepped out, umbrella in hand, and walked up the cracked path to the main doors. They were chained shut, but someone had wedged a small space at the bottom, just enough to slip through. A chill ran up my spine. Inside, the smell of dust and disinfectant hit me like a memory I didn't want. The hallway lights flickered weakly from a backup generator. I whispered his name, Sam? Feeling ridiculous, but doing it anyway. Silence. Then a drip of water somewhere, a soft echo. I thought of the note again. The truth didn't die with me. What truth could possibly be worth haunting me for? As I turned to leave, I noticed a bulletin board half torn off the wall. Pinned to it was a photo. The old surgical team, 1995. Samuel stood in the middle, arms crossed, looking proud but tired. Behind him, barely visible, was a young girl in a hospital gown, staring straight at the camera. I didn't recognize her, but something about her eyes, that mix of fear and defiance, made me shiver. I snapped a photo of it on my phone and walked back to the car. My heart felt both heavier and strangely alive. It's strange, isn't it? How the past knows exactly when to knock. As I drove home, the rain picked up again. The windshield wipers kept time like a metronome. I caught myself whispering to the empty seat beside me, "What did you do, Sam?" Maybe I was talking to him, maybe to myself. That night, I placed the letter on my desk right next to his old stethoscope. The clock read 11:47 p.m. I thought about burning it, just ending the mystery there. But I couldn't. You see, the older you get, the less you fear the answer. What you fear is not knowing. So I turned off the light, and before I went to bed, I whispered, "Tomorrow, I'm coming back." The wind brushed against the window like fingertips, and for a moment, just a moment, I swore I heard him say my name. Laura. Maybe it was the house. Maybe the rain. Or maybe the truth really doesn't die that easily. And if you've ever had a question that's haunted you for years, one you've buried under routine, under silence, maybe it's time to open that envelope too. Don't be afraid of what you'll find. Sometimes, the answers are the only thing still trying to find you. If this story stirred something in you, hit the like button, share it with someone who understands quiet heartbreak, and subscribe. There's more to come, and sometimes the next story might just help you face your own. The next morning, the sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped. The city smelled like wet pavement and cedar. I sat in my car outside St. Mary's Hospital, staring at the building that used to feel like home. Now, it just looked like a tomb someone forgot to seal. It had been nearly 3 decades since the fire, but the old wing was still closed off. The windows were boarded, the paint peeled like skin. I thought about turning back more than once, but the letter in my coat pocket felt heavier than it should. It was like it was pulling me forward. The front doors were locked, but a side gate was ajar, just enough for me to slip through. The air inside was cold and stale, like the breath of a place that had stopped living. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, bouncing off walls lined with faded photos of nurses and doctors who looked too young, too hopeful. Samuel's face was in one of them, smiling that tired smile he wore after long shifts. I made my way down the back stairwell to the basement, the one we used to joke about, the storage dungeon. Every hospital had one, the place where forgotten files and broken machines went to die. The light flickered as I reached the bottom. Rows of old cabinets stretched like soldiers in the dark. Most were rusted shut, but near the far wall, one drawer had a tag still readable. S. Finch, Wing C. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it closed forever, but I opened it anyway. The smell of paper and disinfectant hit me. Inside were files, some labeled, some not, and one thick brown folder marked Patient 047. Confidential. Samuel's handwriting again. My heart started to pound. I ran my thumb across the ink, noticing how deep the pen had pressed, like he'd been in a hurry or angry. The folder felt warm in my hands, though I knew that was impossible. Before I could open it, I heard a shuffle behind me. "Laura?" It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, soft, raspy. I turned and saw Nora Klein, one of the senior nurses who'd worked with us back then. Her hair was white now, but those sharp blue eyes hadn't dulled. "Nora," I whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," she said. "You shouldn't be down here. This place is supposed to stay locked." I held up the file. "Then maybe you can tell me why this was marked confidential under Samuel's name." She froze. For a second, she looked 20 years younger. The same look she used to have when the night shift went wrong. "Laura, some things don't need to be found again," she said quietly. I stepped closer. "He sent me a letter. From the grave, apparently. Said the truth didn't die with him. You worked with him that night, didn't you?" Nora's eyes flickered to the folder, then back at me. There were patients that never made it to the records. He tried to protect them, tried to protect himself too. "What does that even mean?" I demanded. She sighed and rubbed her temple. "It means your husband was a good man in a bad place. But good men can make choices that look unforgivable." I didn't know if that was comfort or a warning. When she left, I finally opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a black and white photo. A girl, maybe 16. Her hair was long, her eyes defiant but scared. The label under the picture read, Patient 47, June. The report said she died in the fire, unidentified victim. But Samuel's signature was on the bottom of every page. My hand shook as I flipped through. Blood type, surgery notes, diagrams, and then a piece of paper that didn't belong there. A small, crumpled appointment slip for a special procedure. Written in the margin were the words, organ consent, emergency only, and clipped to the corner of the last page, a strand of hair, blackened at the tip, real, human. I dropped the folder. It hit the floor with a soft thud that echoed louder than it should have. I whispered, "What were you doing, Sam?" For years, I had pictured him as the man who saved lives, not the one who might have risked them. The man who came home smelling like soap and coffee, not fire and guilt. Nora's words rang in my ears. He protected himself. But from what? I went after her. She was halfway up the stairs, hand on the rail. "Nora, wait!" Why didn't he report it? If he knew something, anything, why didn't he go to the police? She turned, her face pale in the flickering light. Because he was the one who signed off on the surgery. I felt the world tilt again. "That's impossible," she shook her head. "I saw the paperwork myself. He took responsibility. But I don't think he was the one who started it." My throat tightened. "So you're saying he covered for someone?" "I'm saying," she said, stepping closer, "that if you keep digging, you might find out why he couldn't tell you the truth. And maybe you'll wish he hadn't." She left after that, her footsteps fading up the stairs. I sat there for a long time, staring at the open file. The pages fluttered slightly from the draft in the hallway. Every word, every mark of his handwriting felt like a piece of him I never knew. It hit me then. I'd spent 40 years married to a man whose secrets outlived him, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know who he really was. But curiosity has a way of turning fear into fuel. I took the file, closed the cabinet, and walked out. The elevator buttons didn't work, so I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the exit, the rain had started again, gentle but constant, like the world was trying to wash something clean. Back in my car, I opened the folder again, staring at that girl's photo. June. The name alone felt like sunlight after winter. Who was she? Why was her file hidden under Samuel's name? And if he was protecting someone, who was he protecting her from? I whispered to myself, "Maybe the truth didn't die with you, Sam, but I think it's about to kill me." As I drove home, the hospital lights faded in the rear-view mirror. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a doctor. I felt like a patient, one who finally realized she'd been living in someone else's diagnosis. When I got home, I placed the folder on the kitchen table. The house creaked softly, like it was listening. I could still hear Nora's voice in my head. Good men can make choices that look unforgivable. Maybe. But good men also leave trails. And something told me Samuel Finch's trail wasn't finished yet. When I got home, the rain had finally stopped, but the world still felt soaked in something heavier. I made tea, the way I always did when I needed to think, and I sat by the kitchen window staring at the folder. Patient 047. The name June burned in my head, like a song I couldn't stop humming. I told myself I'd wait until morning to open it again. But by midnight, I was in my car, driving across town to see my son. Peter had always been my anchor, calm, brilliant, too practical for his own heart. A medical examiner, just like his father, only colder. The kind of man who lives by facts and keeps feelings filed away like autopsy reports. He opened the door, surprised. "Mom, it's late." "I found something," I said, "at St. Mary's. Your father's old files." He looked past me, like checking if someone was watching. "You shouldn't be there. It's condemned." I had a key. He sighed, rubbed his face, and let me in. The apartment smelled like coffee and paperwork. I laid the folder on his table. "This was hidden under your father's name. It's about a girl named June." Peter's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe fear. "Mom," he said quietly, "Dad left things behind for a reason. You don't need to open that door again." "Reason?" I asked. "He was my husband. I have every right to know what he was hiding." He shook his head. "No. You have every right to remember him the way you need to. Don't ruin that." That word, ruin, hit me like a diagnosis. "What's in there, Peter? Tell me the truth." He crossed his arms. The truth is, he trusted me to handle what he couldn't. After he died, I took care of everything. The files, the testimonies, the donations. Let it go. Handle what he couldn't? You sound like you're covering for him. His tone hardened. "Mom, listen to yourself. You're chasing ghosts. Dad is gone. The past is gone. Please, for once, let it stay that way." I stared at him, realizing what he was really saying. He knew something he'd known for years. I whispered, "You've seen these files before." He didn't deny it. He just said, "You don't want to know." "Don't tell me what I want," I snapped. "I lived with that man for 40 years. I deserve to know who he really was." For the first time, Peter's voice cracked. "If you keep digging, you'll lose the version of him that loved you." "Then maybe," I said softly, "that version was never real." He turned away, picked up his phone. "If you can't stop, I'll have to step in legally. You're 70, Mom. I can request a competency hearing. It's for your own protection." I stared at him, stunned. "You'd use the law against your own mother?" He didn't look proud, just tired. "I'd rather do that than watch you fall apart chasing something that should have stayed buried." There was nothing left to say. I picked up the folder, slid it back into my bag, and walked out. The night air was cold, sharp enough to bite. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My own son, the one I'd raised to value truth, was now guarding a lie. On the drive home, I couldn't shake Samuel's words from the letter. The truth didn't die with me. Maybe Peter wasn't protecting me. Maybe he was protecting his father's legacy. Or himself. When I got home, the house felt different, like it knew what had happened. I poured another cup of tea, but didn't drink it. I turned on the old radio in the corner, the one Samuel used to fix whenever it crackled. It buzzed with static, and then, faintly, I heard it. His voice. "Laura." I froze. The sound was soft, distorted, but it was him. "Laura, if you're hearing this, the answer is in room 204. Don't trust anyone who wears a white coat." Then silence. The room went still. I stared at the radio, my hands trembling. I replayed it in my mind. The exact words, the warning. Room 204. That was the surgical ward, the one that burned. I went over to the radio, checking the dial. No tape, no signal. The machine wasn't even plugged in. My heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from something else. Certainty. For a second, I almost laughed. Maybe grief really does make people hear things. But deep down, I didn't think I was losing my mind. I thought Samuel was trying to tell me something. I walked upstairs and opened our old photo album. There he was, standing outside room 204, smiling, arm around his team. June's eyes staring from the background of that same picture. Coincidence, maybe. Or not. I whispered. You always loved your puzzles, didn't you, Sam? Well, here I am, still solving them. I closed the album, exhaled slowly, and looked around the empty bedroom. Everything we'd built together suddenly felt like evidence. Photos, papers, even the ring on my finger. The people we love the most, they never vanish. They just hide inside the things we're too scared to look at. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept hearing his voice over and over. Don't trust anyone who wears a white coat. That line stuck in me like a needle. Because we both wore white coats. And if I couldn't trust doctors, if I couldn't trust the hospital, then who was left? By dawn, I'd already decided. I was going back to St. Mary's, to room 204. I don't know if it was bravery or madness, maybe both. But I knew this. When the dead start whispering, it's not always to haunt you. Sometimes it's to save you from forgetting who you are. The next morning, I stood outside the rusted gates of St. Mary's again. The sun had just started to rise, bleeding gold through the fog, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared. I was determined. Room 204. That's what he said. The whole wing was still sealed off, marked with warning signs that had long lost their color. I pulled the old master key from Samuel's bag, the one he'd kept in his desk for decades, and slid it into the lock. It turned like it remembered me. Inside, the air was thick and still. Dust floated through shafts of light like it was trying to remember how to move. The floor creaked under my steps. I kept one hand on the wall, following the faded numbers painted above each door. 202, 203, and then 204. The handle was cold. For a second, I hesitated. I could almost hear Samuel's voice again. Don't trust anyone who wears a white coat, I whispered. That includes you, doesn't it? And pushed the door open. The room was small, half burned, half preserved. Metal tables, rusted equipment, a single window boarded from the outside. And on the far wall, written in dark charcoal, were 5 words that stopped my heart. Do not blame him. The letters were jagged, desperate, like someone had written them in a hurry. My throat went dry. I stepped closer, tracing the edge of the writing with my fingers. The texture wasn't paint, it was ash. Next to it, on a half-broken desk, was a leather notebook singed along the edges. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Samuel's loops and slanted letters. The first line read, I took the blame to save the one person who didn't deserve it. My knees almost gave out. The next page was soaked, the ink smeared by water or tears, maybe both. The few words still visible made no sense. She didn't know June. The fire wasn't. And then a single name at the bottom, Samuel Finch. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized the handwriting on the last line didn't match his. I flipped to the back of the notebook. A smaller line was scrawled across the final page in a different hand, rounder, younger. It read, He didn't start it. Please don't hate him. Signed June. My breath caught. This girl, this patient, she'd been trying to protect him? Why? The file said she was 16, a victim of the fire. The record said she died before the explosion spread to the West Wing. So how could she have written this? The air in the room shifted. carrying a faint scent, smoke and lavender, like her file folder. I turned and saw the remnants of a hospital cot. On it lay a small ID tag, melted on one side. Patient 47, June. I picked it up and something slipped out from underneath. A photograph. A young girl smiling faintly, her hand on her stomach. Pregnant. The note at the bottom read, Father, unknown, physician, Dr. Finch. I felt the world tilt. Samuel? For years I had believed I knew every inch of my husband's life, the kind of man he was, what lines he would never cross. But now, holding that picture, I didn't know what to believe. If he was guilty, why cover for her? Why write I took the blame to save the one person who didn't deserve it? Unless he wasn't saving himself. I sat down at the edge of the table, my mind spinning. Maybe she wasn't a victim. Maybe she was part of something, or someone he was protecting. I whispered, Sam, what did you do? Then I saw something else, a small drawer under the desk. Inside were half-burned hospital forms, stamped private consent. The date, 1 day before the fire, the patient listed, June, the attending physician, Dr. Samuel Finch, the procedure, emergency fetal extraction, restricted authorization, fetal extraction. My stomach dropped. She'd been pregnant, and he had operated on her. But if it was illegal, why risk everything? Why lie? I read the scribbled margin note again. She didn't know. Didn't know what? I felt dizzy. My hands shook as I set the papers down. Somewhere deep in the building, something creaked. Like footsteps. Or maybe just the building remembering its own ghosts. I whispered, if he did this, why would she defend him? And then it hit me. Maybe Samuel wasn't hiding guilt. Maybe he was hiding mercy. Could it be possible he broke the law to save her? I looked around the room again. The walls blackened, the smell of burned medicine, the faint echo of what had happened that night. If he'd been covering for someone else, that meant someone else had started the fire. Someone powerful enough to stay hidden. The words on the wall, "Do not blame him," started to make sense. I closed the notebook carefully and slipped it into my bag. My pulse wouldn't slow down. As I left, I glanced back one last time. The sun had crept through a crack in the boarded window, landing perfectly on those words, like they were glowing just for me. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware of what had just come alive inside me. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheels so hard my fingers hurt. My mind kept looping the same question. If he broke the law to save her, does that make him a criminal or a savior? It wasn't just about Samuel anymore. It was about what it means to be good. Whether doing the wrong thing for the right reason still makes you guilty. That night, I sat by the window again, staring at the hospital across the river. The notebook lay open beside me. I couldn't stop rereading those words. He didn't start it. Please don't hate him. I whispered into the quiet. I don't hate you, Sam. I just wish I understood. And for the first time, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a strange, fragile curiosity. Because sometimes, to find the truth, you have to see through the eyes of the one who sinned. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The notebook from room 204 sat open on my table, and every word on those burned pages pulsed like a heartbeat. I knew what I had to do next. Go through Samuel's old storage boxes. It was almost dawn when I pulled down the attic ladder. Dust rained over my shoulders like ash. Every box up there was labeled neatly, just like he used to do. Medical journals, tax folders, old research notes, and then, in the farthest corner, a wooden chest I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there were files sealed in plastic, letters tied with string, and a small metal box locked with a code. I knew the code before I even thought about it. Our anniversary. The lock clicked open with a soft sigh. Inside were 2 documents. One was a surgical consent form, signed in faint blue ink, June Morrison. And beneath it, a certificate of adoption. My name, Laura Finch. At first, my mind refused to make sense of it. The room spun. I looked again. My handwriting, my signature. The date from 40 years ago. Except I'd never signed this paper. June's birth date matched the same year I'd lost my baby. The miscarriage that nearly ended me. Samuel had been the only one who knew how broken that left me. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I whispered, "Oh God. Samuel, what did you do?" Behind the papers was a small photograph. A baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, a faint, heart-shaped birthmark under her collarbone. I remembered that mark. I remembered touching it once. Or maybe I dreamed it, back when I still hoped my child was alive. The floor creaked behind me. I turned. Peter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You shouldn't be up here." I held out the papers. "You knew." His jaw tightened. "Mom, you knew," I shouted. "You knew she existed." He stepped closer, voice low and measured, the same tone he used when explaining a cause of death. "He told me when I was 19. He made me promise to protect you, to protect everything he built, by lying to me, by keeping you from destroying yourself." I stared at him, disbelief turning to rage. Destroy myself? "Peter, that girl, June, she's my daughter." He shook his head sharply. "She was your daughter. She died in the fire. That's the truth." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "The truth is, she was taken from me. He found her, hid her, and you helped him. You don't understand." "Then help me," I pleaded. "Make me understand." He looked at me for a long time, really looked at me, and then said, "He hid her because the surgery that saved her life wasn't legal. He performed it himself. She was 16, Mom. If the hospital found out, he'd lose everything. His license, his reputation, the only thing he had left after you lost her." I felt like the air had been sucked from the room. So he stole her from me to protect his career? "He did it to save her life," Peter snapped. "You think he could live with letting her die?" I shook my head. "And you think I could live with never knowing she existed?" Peter slammed his fist against the beam. "If he told you, you would have gone to the police. You would have exposed everything. The hospital, the procedure, him. He trusted me to keep you safe from the truth." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Safe? You call this safe? You let me bury an empty coffin." He turned away. "You weren't supposed to find the letter. He wrote it for me, not for you." I froze. "The letter from St. Mary's?" He nodded, guilt flickering across his face. "I sent it. The invitation. The note. I thought maybe you'd finally stop running from the past once you saw what he sacrificed." My whole body went still. You forged his handwriting. His silence was answer enough. "Why?" I whispered. "Why now?" "Because you kept asking questions about that fire," he said. "I thought if you saw the truth, you'd finally let it rest. But instead, you started digging again." I stepped closer, voice trembling. "So you played God, just like he did. You decided what I could handle." He looked at me, eyes wet now. "I was trying to protect you. No, I said quietly. You were protecting yourself from the guilt of helping him lie. The words hung between us, heavy as the years we'd lost. Then Peter's tone hardened again. What difference does it make now? She's gone. He's gone. You can't fix it. I took a step forward, holding up the adoption paper. I can tell the truth. That's what's left, he scoffed. And what will that do? Drag his name through the mud? Ruin what's left of this family? He did what he had to do, Mom. I stared at him. This man I raised, this man who used to believe in right and wrong. And what about what I had to do? I had to grieve a child who wasn't dead. I had to forgive a husband who didn't deserve it. I had to become a stranger in my own life just so you two could live comfortably in a lie. He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted away. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking but firm. He may have thought he was saving me. But you don't save someone by erasing them. The room went silent. Outside, the wind rattled the old shutters. Peter whispered, If you go public with this, they'll tear his name apart. I looked down at the photo of the baby, her tiny fingers curled around nothing, and said, Maybe that's the price of the truth. He flinched. You sound just like him. No, I said softly. For the first time, I don't. Peter stood there, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Maybe he didn't. I walked past him, the papers still in my hand. My voice was calm, almost gentle. You can choose silence, Peter, but I've lived with silence for 40 years. I'm done. He didn't stop me. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table, the light from the window spilling across the documents. The forged signature, the consent form, the face of a child who looked too much like me. I whispered, June, I'm sorry. And for the first time, I felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of a reckoning. Because sometimes, the only way to love the dead is to finally tell the truth they couldn't. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the marble floors, or maybe it was the way everyone refused to meet my eyes, like grief was contagious. I sat there, my hands folded tight in my lap, and watched my son stand across from me like I was a stranger. Peter's voice was calm, clinical, rehearsed. Your Honor, my mother has shown signs of cognitive decline. She's fixated on events from decades ago and is displaying erratic behavior. I'm requesting a temporary guardianship review for her safety. My safety. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. For weeks, I'd wondered how far he'd go to keep the past buried. Now I had my answer. The judge turned to me. Dr. Finch, do you have anything to say in response? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor, I do. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From everything I had carried too long. I am not confused. I am not delusional. I am a woman who has been lied to for 40 years. And today, I brought proof. I held up the small cassette recorder, the one that had whispered to me in the dark. Peter frowned. Mom, please don't. But I pressed play. The sound crackled to life. Samuel's voice, faint and distant, but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't tell the truth while I was alive, he began. His tone was calm, measured, the voice of a man who'd carried too much. They said it was better to let the world believe I was guilty. Safer for everyone. But I can't rest knowing she's still paying for my silence. Peter's face went pale. Samuel's voice continued. I took the blame for the fire at St. Mary's because the man who caused it wasn't just a doctor. He was the chief of surgery. He was also the one who hurt that girl, June. She wasn't a patient to him. She was a victim. I found her bleeding in the operating room and did what I had to do to save her life. That meant breaking the law and lying to the woman I loved most. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I could barely breathe. I signed the false report, Samuel's voice went on. I hid the child because if the truth came out, she would have been branded as the daughter of shame. I couldn't let that happen, so I became the monster in her story instead. Then silence. The judge looked up, confused. Is that authentic? I nodded. It's his voice. The same man your hospital called a criminal. The same man my son just tried to declare me unfit for defending. Peter's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't move. Mom, he whispered, you don't understand. He made me promise. Promise to keep lying, I said softly. To protect his name, not the truth. He shook his head. No, to protect you. You were broken after losing her. He thought, if you ever knew. I cut him off. He thought I'd fall apart. But what he didn't understand is that silence breaks people faster than truth ever could. The judge cleared her throat. Dr. Finch, I think this proceeding has gone beyond family, I said, quietly. Yes, I suppose it has. It's about what we choose to carry and what we leave buried. My husband spent his life carrying someone else's sin. My son carried his lie. I carried the grief. But none of us carried the truth. Until now. Peter stepped forward, voice trembling. He wasn't trying to deceive you, Mom. He was trying to save that girl. You, of all people, should understand. You were a doctor, too. I looked at him, at his face that looked so much like his father's, and I finally understood. You think saving someone justifies everything that comes after. He blinked. Doesn't it? I sighed. No. Because when you lie to protect, you take away someone else's right to heal. And you can't love someone you don't let heal. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I thought I was protecting his memory. And I thought I was protecting yours, I said. But maybe what we both forgot was that love without truth isn't protection. It's prison. The room was silent. The judge leaned back, watching us like she didn't want to interrupt. Peter's voice broke. He was my hero. I stepped closer. He still can be, but not by pretending he was perfect. Let him be the man who made the hard choice, who lied to save a girl the world had already failed. That's who he really was. For the first time, I saw it. The child in him, the boy who'd worshipped his father and never questioned the cost. Tears rolled down his face. He whispered, I didn't want you to hate him. I reached out and touched his hand. I never hated him, Peter. I hated not knowing why. The judge finally spoke. Given this new evidence, I'm dismissing the guardianship request. Dr. Finch, you are of sound mind and remarkable strength. The gavel hit once, and just like that, it was over. But for me, it wasn't. I turned off the recorder and stared at the little machine, the one that had carried his voice through decades of silence. In my head, I could still hear him. That gentle, tired tone. I was never just a doctor, Laura. I was a witness, and witnesses don't always get to tell their story. Peter stood beside me, his hand still trembling. What now? He asked. I looked at him, and for the first time, I smiled. Now we tell the story he couldn't. As we walked out into the hallway, sunlight spilled through the courthouse windows. It was brighter than I expected, almost too bright, like the world had decided to forgive itself. I whispered to myself, he didn't need my forgiveness. He just needed me to understand. And in that moment, I finally did. The hospital looked smaller than I remembered. Time does that. It shrinks things that once terrified you. The sea wing was still sealed off. Though the city had stripped most of the warning tape away, the air smelled of metal and rain, like the building itself was holding its breath. I brought flowers, white lilies. Samuel used to say they looked like forgiveness trying to bloom. When I reached room 204, the door was still marked with soot. I placed the flowers beneath the old window, the one June had probably looked through before everything burned. My reflection in the glass was faint, almost ghost-like. Maybe that was fitting, I whispered. I found out the truth, sweetheart. It just took me a lifetime. Footsteps echoed down the hall. When I turned, Nora Klein was standing there, the nurse who'd worked beside Samuel all those years ago. She looked older, softer somehow, carrying a small envelope in her trembling hands. "She told me you'd come back," Nora said quietly. I frowned. "Who?" "June." Her voice cracked on the name. "Before the fire, she gave me this. Told me to give it to you if you ever found her file." She held out the envelope. My name was written across it in a shaky teenage hand. For a moment, I couldn't open it. My fingers hovered above the seal, afraid of what was inside, afraid there might be nothing left to forgive. But then I took a breath and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed around the edges. The handwriting was uneven but familiar somehow, like the echo of something I'd once known. It said, "If you ever find me, know that I forgave you long before you knew the truth. June." The words blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest, my body shaking in silent waves. All the years of wondering, all the nights spent asking why, gone in one breath. Forgiveness. It had waited for me, patient as light behind clouds. Nora placed a hand on my shoulder. "She wasn't angry, Laura, not even at the end. She said you would understand someday." I wiped my tears and looked up at her. Did she suffer? Nora's eyes filled with compassion. No. She was scared, but she wasn't alone. Samuel stayed with her until the smoke took the air. He wouldn't leave her side. I closed my eyes. For the first time, the image of him I carried, the liar, the coward, the man who'd deceived me, shifted into something else. A man kneeling beside a dying girl, holding her hand so she wouldn't die afraid. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting the only piece of innocence left in that place. I sank to the floor, the letter still in my hands. All this time, I thought forgiveness was something I needed to give, but she already gave it to me. Nora nodded. She did. Maybe because she knew what it cost you to look for her. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive. I looked back at the blackened wall, where the charcoal words still faintly read, "Do not blame him." June had written that too. Every message, every note. It wasn't about guilt. It was about release. I whispered, "She forgave both of us." Nora smiled faintly. Maybe that's what she wanted, for the truth to set all of you free. We stayed there for a while, two women in a room full of ghosts, and for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt sacred. When I finally stood, the rain outside had stopped. A thin shaft of sunlight slipped through the broken blinds, landing right on the flowers. I spent 40 years punishing myself for a sin I didn't commit, I said. And now I realized that forgiveness was here the whole time, waiting for me to stop running. Nora squeezed my hand. Then maybe it's time to stop punishing the dead too. I nodded. As I left the hospital, the city looked different. Less gray, somehow softer. The past hadn't changed, but the way it sat inside me had. On the drive home, I thought about Samuel's final words in the tape. I took the blame to save the one person who didn't deserve it. I finally understood what he meant. He wasn't talking about June. He was talking about me. He wanted me to live without the burden of knowing. He thought silence would protect me, but he was wrong. Silence doesn't protect. It only preserves pain. Still, I forgave him too. Not because he asked, but because I needed to. That night, I lit a candle by the window and placed June's letter beside it. The flame flickered gently, reflecting off the glass. And for a moment, it looked like three shadows stood together there. Mine, Samuel's, and hers. I whispered, "We're okay now." And for the first time in 40 years, I actually believed it. It started quietly. No grand announcement, no ceremony. Just me, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at June's letter one last time. The paper had softened over the weeks, like it had breathed with me. Every word on it had already done what it needed to do. It set me free. I spent the next few days thinking about what freedom really means. Not the kind where you run away, but the kind where you finally stop running. That's when I called Nora. She came over that afternoon with her cane and her steady voice. I told her, "If the world is finally going to know what happened at St. Mary's, it should come from us, not from rumors or case files." She nodded. "It's time, Laura." That's how the June Foundation began. A few people in a living room, a shared story, a single idea to protect women who couldn't protect themselves. We didn't have money at first. We didn't even have a plan. But we had names. Women Nora remembered. Cases that were never reported. Nurses who'd been silenced for speaking up. We started reaching out. Within weeks, we had volunteers, then reporters, then lawyers. For the first time in 40 years, I felt useful again. Not as a doctor, but as a witness. Peter didn't say much when he found out. He just showed up at my house one evening, holding a file under his arm. He looked tired, like a man who had spent too long defending something that no longer needed defense. "I talked to the board at St. Mary's," he said quietly. "They're reopening the investigation." I stared at him. "You're serious?" He nodded. "They're naming a new inquiry after him, the Dr. Samuel Finch Review. They want to clear his record." For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Pride, sorrow, maybe both. "He'd hate the attention," I said. Peter gave a small smile. "Then let's make sure it actually means something." He laid the file on the table. Inside were testimonies, records of surgeries hidden by the old administration, notes from Nora's journal, every piece of truth we'd been too afraid to face. He said, "I want to help with the foundation, if you'll let me." I looked at him for a long time, my son, who had once called me unstable, who had tried to silence me to protect his father's legacy, and somehow I didn't feel anger anymore. Just the quiet understanding that forgiveness doesn't need to be earned to be real. So I said, "You're already part of it." Over the next few months, everything changed. The press caught on to the story. Nora spoke publicly for the first time in decades. Her voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "Dr. Finch wasn't a criminal," she said into the microphone. "He was the only man in that hospital who tried to protect those girls." The hearing made national news. They called it the St. Mary's Redemption Case. But I didn't care about headlines. I cared about the faces of the nurses who came forward, the mothers who wrote letters thanking us for giving them courage to speak. Peter managed the medical review team. I handled the outreach for survivors. Together, we built something out of ashes. On the day the investigation closed, the hospital board sent me a letter. They restored Samuel's license posthumously, calling his actions a moral stand misread as misconduct. I sat there reading it, my eyes filling, not because it erased the pain, but because it finally told the truth. That night, Peter and I visited his grave. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of lilies again. I placed the board's letter beside the headstone. "He'd laugh at this," I said. Peter smiled faintly. "Yeah. He'd say bureaucracy finally found its conscience." We stood there for a while, silent but at peace. When I got home, I recorded the closing message for the Foundation's first public campaign. I wanted it to sound simple, not dramatic, just honest. I looked straight into the camera and said, "Don't ever hand over your power to someone just because you love them. Don't let fear or loyalty keep you silent when something feels wrong. Love should never ask you to erase yourself." Then I paused and added softly, "And if it has, start again. It's never too late to protect what's left of your truth." After the recording ended, I sat there for a long time, just listening to the quiet hum of the room. I thought of June's handwriting, Samuel's voice, Peter's eyes, when he finally said he was sorry. I realized that forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a practice. You wake up and choose it, over and over, until it becomes part of who you are. That's what the June Foundation became too. Not a monument to guilt, but a living archive of forgiveness. A place where women could walk in with stories too heavy to carry alone, and walk out knowing they were believed. Sometimes when new volunteers ask why I started it, I tell them the truth. Because once upon a time, I forgot that silence doesn't protect anyone. Now, every folder in our office bears the same line I wrote under the logo: "No truth deserves to die in a drawer." It's strange, really. After a lifetime spent chasing the truth, I learned that the truth doesn't chase back. It waits. It waits for you to be brave enough to meet it. And once you do, it doesn't hurt anymore. It heals. The building had changed, but the light still fell the same way. Late afternoon, soft and golden, filtering through frosted glass. I sat by the window in what used to be St. Mary's East Wing, now a nursing home filled with quiet laughter, slow footsteps, and the hum of distant televisions. The nurse who wheeled me in didn't know I'd spent half my life walking these halls. She just smiled politely, asked if I wanted the window open. I told her no. I liked the stillness. On the small table beside me sat a glass box, clear, simple, with 3 dried rose petals sealed inside. One red, one white, one pale pink. Peter said they represented the 3 of us, but to me, they looked like 3 parts of the same heart that had finally stopped breaking. I traced my finger along the edge of the glass. "You'd laugh at me now, Samuel," I whispered. "All this time, I thought forgiveness was a storm. Turns out it's just light." A soft breeze stirred the curtains. For a second, I could almost hear his voice, that calm, patient tone he used when I couldn't sleep. "You don't need my protection anymore. You found your own." The sound wasn't real. I knew that. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe some voices never really go away. They just change the way they live inside you. I smiled. "Yes," I murmured. "But I'll keep your voice as my light." The radio beside me crackled faintly, and for a heartbeat, I thought it might speak again. It didn't. Just an old jazz song drifting in from another room, something familiar, soft, and human. I looked out through the glass. The sun was hitting the window just right, scattering colors across the floor. Tiny fragments of gold and amber. For a moment, it reminded me of the hospital's old operating lamps, how they used to shine down on me and Samuel when we were young doctors. Two idealists who thought saving lives was simple. We were wrong, of course. Saving lives was never simple. Neither was love. Behind me, I could hear laughter, patients calling each other by name, nurses trading stories. I thought about June, about the daughter I never got to raise, and the woman she became without me. Somewhere, in whatever peace she found, I hoped she knew how deeply she had changed us all. Peter visited that morning before heading to the foundation office. He's good at this work, better than I ever was. He's patient now, slower to speak, quicker to listen. He carries the Finch name differently, not as a weight, but as a promise. He left me a note on the table before he went. I unfolded it again and smiled at the single line he had written. Truth doesn't break people, Mom. Hiding it does. That was his father's lesson, passed down the hard way. The glass box caught the light again, and I could see my reflection. Older, yes, but not haunted anymore. Just settled. For years, I thought closure meant answers. The right names, the right files, the right story told. But now I understand. Closure isn't about knowing. It's about no longer needing to. Outside, a young nurse was helping a patient plant roses in the courtyard. I watched them through the window, the soil dark against the sunlight, the petals trembling in the wind. Life still grew here, even after everything that had burned. I whispered to the empty room, "You'd like this, Samuel. The way the light hits the glass, the way it refuses to die." The radio hummed a low note, almost in agreement. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hold on to anything. Not the guilt, not the questions, not even the pain, just the warmth, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. It just stays, quiet and steady, long after the music fades. Outside, the roses caught the sunlight, and through the old hospital glass, I saw them glow like small, living lanterns. I took one slow breath and whispered, "We're all home now." And for the first time in 40 years, the light felt enough. You know, people always think closure means answers, that if you just dig deep enough, confront enough ghosts, you'll finally understand why things happened the way they did. But the truth is, sometimes you never really know. And maybe that's okay. Because life isn't about collecting explanations. It's about surviving the questions, learning how to live with them. I spent years trying to make sense of what Samuel did, what June went through, what Peter became. But in the end, I realized understanding isn't the same as peace. Peace doesn't come from figuring it all out. It comes from accepting that love and pain often wear the same face. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the same ones who tried to protect us. And sometimes, we hurt others without even meaning to, simply because we didn't know any better at the time. If you're listening to this, maybe you've carried something heavy too. A secret, a silence, a memory that still wakes you up at night. Maybe you've wondered what you could have done differently. I have too. But here's what I've learned. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's a door you open for yourself, the one that lets light back in after too many years of darkness. You don't have to have all the answers to find peace. You just have to stop running from the truth. And when you finally face it, it's never as cruel as you imagined. It's just honest. We never really know the people we love most. Not completely. We only know the version of them that stood before us, trying their best with what they had. And maybe that's enough. So, if there's something you've been afraid to look at, look. If there's someone you've been waiting to forgive, forgive. If there's a truth you've been hiding from yourself, open the door. You don't need to do it perfectly. Just start. Because the longer you wait, the more you let the silence write your story for you. And you deserve to write it yourself. Messy, flawed, beautiful, true. And if this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you were meant to hear it. Maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for surviving. If you've ever carried a secret you couldn't speak, or a love you couldn't explain, or a pain you couldn't share, leave a rose. Not for me, for you. To remind yourself that you still believe in truth, and you still believe in love.